Hi folks, welcome to another instructional video series for the Salem Kettlebell Training YouTube channel. Go ahead and subscribe on the link below. Today I'm going to be going over one, and usually the first, of three different warm-ups that I commonly prescribe as sort of a general warm-up prior to your strength and conditioning routines here at Salem Kettlebell Training. This one's all about the developmental movement patterns. So that's the reason why it's usually one of the earliest prescribed. There's a lot of gold to be mined out of the developmental movement patterns. Each developmental movement pattern that we go through from infancy to toddlerhood is a way for our brains and bodies to connect to our worlds in a more complete and engaging manner with a deeper understanding of the way it works. So with each of these new movements also comes a different way of thinking. It literally changes our point of view on the world each time we move into a new plane or a new focal position. Incorporating the developmental movement patterns into your training is a way for you to replant that tree of neural awareness. As we do fewer and fewer movements, there's a good side and a bad side to that. One, we get better at the movements that we do more often. So as we go from just being a rug rat on the floor to walking, we get better and better at walking to the point where we're running and jumping and doing all sorts of stuff in a bipedal position with great balance compared to a toddler who's just fallen all over the place. But the other side of that coin, we prune neural connections that we don't use. So I took 2 years of Spanish in high school. I now remember muy poquito, just a very little bit of the Spanish that I took in high school, even though at one point after 2 years, I was practicing conversational Spanish. It's because I was doing so every day for 2 years. I mean, I needed a little refresher after the summer break between my freshman and sophomore year, but it didn't take long for it to come back to me. Well, now it would take a significantly longer time because I've lost so much of that and developed other things like talking about fucking kettlebell training. You know, I'm very good at that now. As you can tell by the fact that each of these videos is 10 plus minutes long. So the developmental movement patterns re-engage neuromuscular patterns that we may have lost, and with them, critical thinking patterns that we may have lost. There's also, and I want to say this with a grain of salt because there's no guarantee, and I'm not a physical therapist whose job it is to deal with pain. But when it comes to restoring function, yes, we'll use our soft tissue work. Yes, we'll use our specific corrective exercises that are going to be part of your warm-up as a Salem Kettlebell Training student. But until we plug those corrective strategies into global movement, we're not really going to get that far. And that's why the developmental movement patterns are so great and used early. Because like if you've got some hip pain, rolling it out is great. Doing some specific stretches or stability exercises is great. But the thing that's going to get that hip pain to change in terms of how it's affecting your movement in your day-to-day life is to incorporate those corrective strategies into your movement for day-to-day life so that you learn, your body learns how to not necessarily avoid that pain, but to move normally in spite of that pain. So often with pain and dysfunction, it's not the initial injury, it's compensatory movement dysfunction that can cause problems and chronic pain. So by incorporating the developmental movement patterns into your corrective strategies, you're going to be restoring function and movement the way the human body was designed to move. So here are the developmental movement patterns. We've got articulation. The first thing that baby does is it starts moving its arms and legs around. Actually, the first thing that baby does is breathing. So we'll actually be going over just a simple breathing exercise first. But then we'll go into some actual movement. So articulation, getting the body parts to move. The dead bug and dead bug progression are ways to get that articulation back, that idea of stabilizing the trunk, not in a high intensity way or what's called a high threshold strategy, but just letting breath stabilize the trunk while the limbs are moving. Next, rolling over. Baby figures out how to roll over. My daughter is 5 months next week, and she can roll from her belly to her back. She hasn't figured out how to roll from her back to her belly yet, but it's coming. And that rolling over is a critical way to get the trunk muscles and the upper and lower extremities to work together to stabilize your body and to create movement. We can do easy rolling with either a leg driver or an arm driver. I'll be showing you both. Next, it's rocking patterns. So once baby is rolled over, there's rocking. They don't go immediately to crawling. That's something that they'll get to later on. But first they have to get comfortable in that quadruped position. They have to learn how their brain and body work together while they're on their bellies or on their backs too. Then we start crawling. So after we've got that rocking pattern down and we're comfortable in a quadruped position, we'll crawl. When it comes to crawling, I'm not going to provide very much coaching because crawling should come naturally to the body. If it doesn't, after a good long while, if there's still something funky going on with your crawling patterns, I'll talk you through it, but I don't want to give a whole lot of instruction. And then finally, after crawling, there's, coming to a seated position, but I don't really incorporate that into our developmental movement patterns. But going from a crawling position or a 6-point position to either a half kneel or a squat and then to standing. So that's the last of our developmental movement patterns. I should put a step 0 up there for the next exercise that we're going to be doing in this series. The first one, in fact, which is called crocodile breathing. Stay tuned.